All right. We've got people joining us already. I like to say that we're professional but casual here at the Warwick's virtual interview. So as you all are coming in and getting settled, we're just going to chat for a few minutes and give everybody a chance to kind of settle in. So you won't have missed anything. And not that you'll hear this, but if you aren't here yet, it's kind of that weird thing. But this is recorded and it will be on Warwick's YouTube channel afterwards. So if you have to step away and miss anything, it will also be on our Warwick's channel. So Tommy Orange, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I think I'm the other way around. I'm casual but professional. And
Okay.
just the casual comes first.
I
Yeah,
like
I
that.
like it.
I like that. So we're a good compliment to each other then. That's what we got going on. Um, Tommy, where are you calling in from today?
I'm calling from my garage in Oakland, California.
There you go. All right. And
Nice.
so, and joining Tommy is Jeniffer Thompson. For those of you that watched a bunch of these interviews, you probably are very familiar with Jeniffer. She's done a bunch of them with us, but we adore her as our interlocutor, as they like to say. So, Jeniffer, where are you calling? You're not in your normal background. So, where are you calling
I'm
from
not.
today?
Yeah, I'm calling him from Malibu,
On your
home
way
of the
to,
Chumash. Yeah. On my
yep.
way to a concert tonight to see one of my favorite producers, Daniel Lanois, who's
Awesome.
brilliant. And so, yeah, so I get
Awesome.
to do both. I get to interview one of my favorite authors and go see one of my favorite artists. So this is a pretty good day for
It's
me.
a pretty good day because typically Jeniffer is usually in San Diego, where Warwick's is located. For those of you that aren't familiar with Warwick's, we're located in La Jolla, San Diego, California. Um, Jeniffer and Tommy are going to chat for about 30-ish minutes today, 35 minutes. And then I will be coming back on with some questions. I know that all of us are used to all this Zoom stuff, but I still have to do my due diligence for those that may not. There's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Pop your questions in there and I will bring those into the conversation at about that 35-ish minute point. Um, in the comment section, I'm going to put in how to order Tommy's book. Some of you already have ordered that from us, and those will be shipping out. We have a limited number of signed copies. So if you would like a signed copy, click that link and put signed copy in there. But the ones that have ordered will be getting a signed copy. Um, and if you're in San Diego area, pop by and see us. We'd love to, you can pick up your book at the store. We'd love to see you. So with that, I'm going to stop my chatter and get the conversation going. So I'll be introducing Jeniffer and Jeniffer will introduce Tommy. So Jeniffer Thompson is a personal branding expert, digital marketing strategist, and publishing consultant. She's an author and speaker who delivers strategy-rich content and actionable tools that educate and empower authors. She co-founded Monkey See Media in 2004, an award-winning book cover and website design house, excuse me. She is also a co-host of the Premise podcast, which this will be on in a few weeks probably. So with that, you two have a great conversation. We'll see you in a little bit.
Thank you, Julie. Hi, Tommy. It's really good to be here. I'm going to introduce you briefly. You have a very brief bio, so I'm going to just go ahead and read that for our folks. Tommy Orange is an enrolled member of the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes of Oklahoma. He was born and raised in Oakland, California. His first book, There, was a finalist for the 2019 Pulitzer Prize. He lives in Oakland, California, and today we're going to talk about your second book, Wandering Stars. And I just want to say thank you because I've been listening to Portishead play over and over again in my head for the last 2 weeks as I've been looking at your cover and reading it. And I was so delighted to hear that that's actually where the title came from, is from a Portishead song, Wandering Star. Can you take us to that moment and just tell us how that happened?
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like that song has aged well.
Yeah, right. I
Um,
listened to it today.
like like it sounds like a song that could come out, in contemporary times and not like sometimes there's a 90s feel to
Hmm.
songs and it's like it just lives, it will always live there. But that song feels like it's still, yeah. So it was March 2018. And this is the most unromantic place to think of a book, um, in a way, or it's annoying maybe to hear. I was signing 5,000 books at a warehouse, um, of There before it came out. And the sales reps team who were helping me to sign all these books, um, they put on a Spotify playlist with the root, There by Radiohead.
Hmm.
And I had known this song. More so, I think I got into Portishead because I used to go to this like open mic night, and there was this beatboxer who recreated Portishead's Wandering Star,
Mm.
all with a loop pedal and the sounds from his mouth. And that was where I really got turned on to Portishead for the first time, and that was like in the early 2000s. So I didn't know the song at the time. And for whatever reason, um, in that moment, I hadn't planned on writing a sequel. I'd already finished There, and there was no thoughts about a sequel. In that moment when I heard the song, I was convinced, like completely, that I was going to write a sequel to There, and it was going to be called Wandering Stars. I think I was fluctuating as to whether it was, I know it was Wandering Stars, and I think she says Wandering Stars even though the song's called Wandering Star.
She does.
Um,
Yeah.
so the title was always Wandering Stars for me. And I didn't know what mysteries would be uncovered in the, after making that decision and really going for it, all these crazy things came about that had to do with stars that are in the book. And that, I couldn't have known in my conscious mind how well the title would have fit a lot of the stuff that I ended up doing.
Yeah.
Um, and even the historical piece was not going to be in the novel originally. Um, I I was in Sweden a year later, and I was at a museum. I was there for the translation of There, and I saw the the curator was giving me a tour because the Swedish people had Cheyenne and Arapaho stuff at their museum, and they were like, "We know we're not supposed to have it, and we're trying to fix that," and all this preamble before we saw it.
Mm.
Um, and there was a newspaper clipping that had Southern Cheyennes, because I'm Southern Cheyenne specifically. There are also Northern Cheyennes. Southern Cheyennes in Florida from 1875 to 1878. And I just fell down this rabbit hole.
Wow.
And it ended up meaning the book would have this whole historical section, which I didn't even know how it would fit. I just knew that there was something there. And doing research for that, I ended up finding out not only that the prison castle, which was basically the root of the boarding school system in the US,
Mhm.
the prison castle was shaped like a star.
Yeah.
And one of the prisoners at the prison castle's name was Star. In addition to another prisoner, his name was Bear Shield. And that's a family from there. And that's how I knew I was going to write a generational line that started way back in time and eventually met up after the aftermath, or at the aftermath of what happened at the end of There.
That's just pretty crazy. I mean, it
Yeah,
must have just felt like the whole time you're like, oh my God. Like the words that come to mind is this is kismet. Like this is supposed to be happening. What, is just unfolding. And
I know. The novel writing process has had I had that experience with There and with this, where like things just happen in a way that feels crazy.
Mhm.
I
And
mean,
music.
like I for in There, one of the characters pulls spider legs out of his leg.
Mhm.
And this isn't kismet, but it's just a weird, like, the novel being a porous process
Yeah.
thing.
Uh-huh.
Because I pulled spider legs out of my own leg, um, in a West Oakland Target bathroom, the exact same as the character, and ended up putting it in the book because I didn't know what to do with it in my life. It was just this insane,
Weird.
like,
Yeah.
grotesque moment.
Maybe it's grotesque. I don't know. I think it's kind of cool. I happen to love spiders, but I definitely don't want them inside of me.
The legs were pretty big. It was like this long. There was two of them.
What? Oh my
Yeah.
God. That's crazy. Yeah, how does
Yeah.
that happen? We
There
don't
was no
know.
explanation online. I scoured the internet just like the character. Um, Ended up calling my dad because I thought it could be a Cheyenne thing.
Hmm. Hmm.
And he told me he thought I got witched, and I was like, "Well, what do I do?" And he was like, "I'll pray for you." And that was all of it. So I
That
was
was the
like,
end.
I don't want this. I'm gonna put it in fiction where it belongs."
I feel like truth is always stranger than fiction, and maybe that's why your books read so easily because so much of it just feels real. I mean, I found out that you're a musician, and as I'm reading it in the music, and your writing has a musicality to it. And I have heard you talk about this in other interviews. Talk to me about how music helps you write and how I think you even talked about like reading it aloud, like listening for the musicality. Can you speak to that?
Yeah. Well, I listen to music like 95% of the time that I'm writing, and the other 5% I'm not listening to music because I'm reading out loud and I'm listening to myself read it. Um, yeah, so I was a musician before I was a writer. Went to school for sound engineering. Um, I just like slipped in the back door of literature somehow. Um,
Because
and
you were supposed to. You didn't have a choice, Tommy.
and I think I was doing a lot of this instinctually,
Mhm.
this listening to the sound of sentences in the editing process. I didn't even really like verbalize it until I started talking about writing when touring for There, and like for the first time talking about the process. Um, so it's a huge part, both listening to music while writing, but also listening to the sonics of the sentences as a
Yeah.
way to figure out how far along the sentences are, or how far in I am on a draft.
Mm,
So reading out loud is like super important to me, and that's part of why I love writing in hotel rooms, because I'm like completely alone
mm.
and can just sort of step into the work and not be thinking about who might be hearing me read,
Read out loud.
these drafts at various stages.
I wanted to ask you about your writing practice and what that looks like for you.
It's different all the time. I don't have like a super steady routine, and this, I never did. Um I wrote it initially, like started writing there um at 5 and 6 in the morning before going to work, and eventually did a bunch of traveling for the job I had before I quit to be an author, which was a digital storytelling work. And I was in a lot of hotel rooms then writing. And then I was in school and at my MFA at the Institute of American Indian Arts. Um, and I have a 13-year-old and now an almost 2-year-old. So
Oh,
with
congratulations.
raising kids, I think you have to just fit it in when you can.
Mhm.
I'll do like hotel residencies to get like solid chunks of writing done. But I don't have a consistent writing routine. I do know that I write best in the morning for sure, and at
Mhm.
night, and like certain hours of the afternoon where I never can. But otherwise, it's just whenever I can make it happen.
Nice, nice. One of the things I wanted to talk about was the narration style in this book. And what's fascinating to me is I didn't even realize that you were switching up the narration until almost toward the end. And then I was starting a chapter and I realized I didn't know who was speaking. And then I looked at the title of the chapter again. And normally, when people switch voice, not just narration style, but voice, they'll have like the name of the person at the top of the chapter. And you didn't do that. And it took me a beat, like literally just a beat to go, oh, this is who's talking. And that's when my brain went, oh, wait a minute. He's been changing narration style this whole time, but I didn't realize it because it's so smooth. So I want to I just want to hear, like, was that a process? Did it happen pretty organically, or when did you realize that this was going to be? I think I heard you say polyphonic, a polyphonic book at one point.
Well, I was always trying to write a different book than There.
Hmm.
Even though it's like deeply connected to There, I didn't want to do the same thing. And in some ways, I feel like titling the chapters the first and last name of the characters like maybe a little bit lazy, or so when it came to thinking about chapter titles, it was further along in the process. I had different names the whole time, but I wanted to pick out moments or phrases or words in within the chapters to be the chapter titles, in the same way that when when you work in the title of the novel into the work itself, it sort of has this boomerang effect of like, oh, this is what this is about. This is I wanted
Yeah,
that to a miniature version of that to happen in the chapters. Um,
it did.
so
It totally
somewhere
did.
somewhere along the way, um, I decided that's the way I wanted to do the chapter titles. But I always
Mhm.
had shifting narration, character and POV and tense, because that's part of the way I like to revise. It allows me to keep working when I don't feel like I can. I'll just change a
Mm,
character's POV or the tense and see what it does.
mm,
And I may end up changing it back, but it really allows me to keep going back to the work because I can do something really technical if I'm not feeling inspired or if I'm feeling really bad about myself or the writing. I can do like technical work and just make sure I keep working because that's, it's one of the hardest parts is to not get stuck and to not get distracted or make excuses to not keep working.
yeah. Did you ever feel like giving up on Wandering Stars?
Yeah, I mean, I think the whole endeavor to write, it has everything to do with not giving up. I mean, I think with a lot of creation, I think the other side of the coin for creatives is destruction, and
Totally. Mm,
I think destruction, the tools of destruction are like doubt, and that's why block and
mm,
paralyzation happens a lot with writers and with other creative people. So it's a constant like am am what I doing is what I'm doing worth anybody else's time? Is it worth my time? Is the writing any good? Is the story any good? These are
mm.
just constants. And I think I'm far, I've spent 12 years on two books, 6 years on each, and I know enough now like just to accept that that's going to be there. Um, but it's yeah, so I know it's not going away. I'm writing a third book, which I sold last at the end of last year,
Mm.
and the same stuff is there, and but it's easier to have there if you know it's supposed to be there. I think it's part of the tool that makes your writing better is doubt.
Yeah.
If you just accepted that your sentences are good as they come out, then you're probably not going to make great sentences.
So true. So true. And I know you give a lot of credit to your editor, Jordan. I assume she is still your editor for this third book.
Yes. Yeah,
Nice.
I love Jordan and working with her and the way that she edits is really not intrusive
Hmm.
on a sentence level. She's really like big picture visionary, like um and and gives me like things to think about rather than like this or that needs to change definitively. It's she directs me toward a greater vision of what I've already tried to envision.
That's pretty incredible. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty incredible. Your writing has to me, it feels like poetry. Even like the hardest parts to read still come out in this very beautiful prose, and it does have this musicality to it. There's something that I wanted you to read, and I asked you earlier to read it, so I'm not hitting you up. Do this thing, but the thing about this writing that I think is so amazing, and I think why people love you so much is you take incredibly devastating topics, really important topics. We're talking about addiction, we're talking about historical trauma, um, and then you make it beautiful. It's more palatable, I think, that way. And the characters are beautiful and they're real and they have so much depth. And that's why I think you can write about things that it would be so otherwise so difficult to read. And so I wanted you to read this one passage because I think it's a really good example of something that just hits you and makes you stop and think. Like reading there for me, I read it through really fast. But when I read Wandering Stars, I had to keep stopping and like kind of sitting with the language and reading it again and like wanting to write things down and like so good. So well done. So
Thank you. Thank you.
let's read this for our listeners.
So I have to share this sort of brag because it was like an insane moment for me. I was sharing a stage with Louise Erdrich on this tour for
Oh,
Wandering Stars,
congratulations on
and
that. She's amazing.
I can't
Yeah.
remember if she asked me this before or on stage. but I think it was before. She said, she asked if, so the character, the part that I'm reading, the character is going through chemotherapy and has cancer. And maybe that's a tiny spoiler. But she said, you must have been really close to somebody who's gone through this,
Mhm.
because she had gone through it. And she said the way that I wrote it was perfect, like perfectly fit the feeling.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and while I do pull generously from my own life and experience for all of my work, um, this just came out of uh, I don't know where, just my imagination. It really was not based on any person or even research. It was just imagining into it.
Mm. Wow.
It was one thing to be grateful for the ancestors, and another thing to know them on the page. I always felt like we didn't do good enough, that our family line was in some way weak. And yes, weakened by the effects of history, colonization, historical trauma, but also not strong enough to pass down the traditions or language successfully, because we lacked something. I hadn't considered everything that had happened, how far back it had been happening to us. We come from prisoners of a long war that didn't stop even when it stopped. Was still being fought when my mom helped take over Alcatraz. I was part of the fight too. So were my grandchildren. But surviving wasn't enough. To endure or pass through endurance test after endurance test only ever give you endurance test passing abilities. Simply lasting was great for a wall, for a fortress, but not for a person.
So powerful. Yeah. I mean, but it's an example, but it happens over and over and over again in your book. And you talk about really hard things and these hard lives. And I'm thinking about all of the research. I mean, 7 generations. That's a lot. So I'd like to know a little bit about the research and how much, I mean, it's not surprising it took you 6 years to write this book, but talk about like the research and the experience for you, just like discovering over and over again these traumas that were happening.
So yeah, it's a mix of research, and I'd never written historical fiction before, so that was like a really new thing.
Mhm.
Um, so the book opens with a young man escaping from the Sand Creek Massacre, and this part was not research. This was a story that I grew up my dad telling this story, and he'd heard it from his grandmother and great grandmothers, and this story told from people that were pretty close to it. Um, and so I just sort of imagined into that whole part, and that was not research based at all. Um, I'm sorry, can you hear something in my background?
Not at
Okay,
all. Oh, yeah.
okay, good.
You're good.
My my son's rolling something upstairs.
He's
Um,
rollerblading. I know it.
but for the prison castle at Fort Marion part, I read a couple books for that. I read a couple books about Pratt and Carlisle. Um, so all the history stuff, I found that even though I don't include a ton of like facts from history, or there's not a ton of research you'll find in the book, um, I found that I needed to like really immerse myself in just people talking about that time period, or writing about people from that time period, to convince myself that I could, because a lot of the characters, it's very character driven. A lot of the narrative is internal, um, and it's about how they're feeling, what they're thinking about. So that was a super new thing, because with there, I really didn't do very much research either. I worked in the community for almost 10 years. I was on a powwow committee, and that was part of where the whole idea came from. And then I grew up in Oakland as a Native person of mixed ancestry. Um, Grew up in Oakland around other Native people my whole life. So the historical fiction and research part was super new for this. And I didn't really find it to be heavy, I feel like just as with writing stuff that clarifies complex feelings,
Mm,
that it unburdens me because I understand it better. The
yeah.
same with research. If I'm finding out more that makes things make more sense, even if it might be heavy or dark or like depressing, to know about the pain that's there, ultimately it helps, it clarifies. And that, is sort of the key to being able to work with this material is knowing that I'm not taking on a burden. I'm trying to unravel something.
Totally. That's really well said. Well, and that actually leads perfectly to my next question. So, Sean, one of our characters, and we don't want spoilers, we got to be careful, but there's something that's happening with the character that I wanted to ask you about. He finds out that he's part native and he's adopted. So, he didn't know his history. He was told he was Italian. And he's sort of struggling with like, how much can I own? And can I say I'm Indian? And I just wanted to ask you, like, how much personal experience went into writing, that challenge for that character of like, can I, it's not me, it's not my life, but how much of it can I own, or should I, or do I need to know about? And then Opal, who's like protecting her grandkids from something that she thinks is going to make their life harder, but really protecting them from their history is what makes it harder.
Yeah. Well, in the case of Sean, um, I don't know where Sean came from, and this is part of what I love about writing fiction, is
Yeah.
that I can become convinced that a character has enough layers to feel real to me, and I just have to uncover them. Um, and Sean, I wanted to write a character like Sean because Oakland is such a diverse place. And I'd also covered a certain gritty part of Oakland, East Oakland, deep East Oakland. Um, but I wanted to talk about this rich hills side of Oakland and have Sean be like weirdly implicated in that community while not
Yeah.
being white and having this totally mixed background. Um, so Sean, while it might sound like I'm like trying to do things with him to make some point, he came as a character like as a voice and as with all these details before I was able to think like this is the function that Sean is whatever utility I think I'm using him for to get ideas across. He came as a character.
Mhm.
Um, with Opal, so my dad is from Oklahoma. He's full blood Cheyenne. His first language was Cheyenne. He didn't speak English till he was 5 and he didn't even see a white person until he was 5.
Wow.
Um, and he did things like picking cotton with his grandparents for 10 cents a day. Just like lived this authentic life in Oklahoma. But he raised us in the city, and
Mhm.
he also, he wasn't raised by his parents. He had a lot of pain around his childhood and his childhood home. Um, and there's a lot of dark aspects of where he grew up and the people, my people, and their experience. And I think part of him wanted to raise us away from that, to protect us from it. But that
Sure.
came at a price, because while he did speak Cheyenne to us growing up, and it was always very clear who we come from. Um, there was some aspect of silence and not teaching us, um, that left this void of and this curiosity about like, well, what does it mean?
Mhm.
And I have a white mom, and so being mixed race, um, in the native world, it's already like a challenge to feel authentic. But then if you're also like not full blood or whatever, some of these dumb things that we hold on to, or if you don't have the knowledge or if you don't speak the language, it leaves you with this idea like that you're not enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was just, came from very personal experience.
It reads like it. And I heard in an interview once that someone asked you if you were Native, and you said yes. And then they asked you, yeah, but how much? And I just was horrified, frankly. And I imagine that came out into the characters because that's what I see Sean is experiencing. Like he feels he doesn't fit in either world and he's not sure what to do with that.
Yeah, recently, um, this year, I was at a university for a speaking event, and this old white guy stood up in the crowd during the Q&A, and he said, "From where I sit up here, and this isn't the first time this type of thing has happened." He said, "You look white to me. So when did you decide that you wanted to be a Native American?" Like I made a decision along the way that I'm going to identify a certain way, as opposed to like that's who I am.
Mhm.
Um, it's just like it's people, a certain kind of American, because we're only taught the real Indians are related to the Pilgrims, and then literally nothing else is taught in our
Right.
institutions. Of
Mhm.
course, somebody who doesn't fit the thing that you think they makes them a real Indian, of course you're going to question somebody who has a more complex and nuanced and human,
Mhm.
um, you know, is a more human version of what a Native person actually is. Of course,
Mhm.
it's gonna do that to you. Of course, you don't have to be rude and awful, but I also understand it because of the way we teach or don't
Yeah.
teach
Mhm.
Native history.
And I hope that changes. I really do. Um, we have to demand it though. We have to
Yeah,
demand change because it's just not gonna happen. Rewriting history to have more truths. I hope that's in our future. But I think, writing such an honest couple of books that you've written is a big start. And so even though that may not be your intention, it's what's happening. So here,
I mean, I
here.
think I love that about fiction.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
what it can sort of secretly do to the hearts and minds of people without like,
Being
you know,
overt. Yeah.
yeah, exactly, without like saying like I'm here to say this,
Mhm.
and to have it happen in story.
Well, it's kind of like what you said about Jordan and how her editing style. It's like it just makes you think. It's not telling you how to think. It's just
Yeah,
giving you something to chew on, something to think about that maybe you
yeah,
can take with you and change your behavior and change how you look at the world and how you treat others. I would like to
yeah.
think. Um, I watched a lot of your interviews and we're all asking you the same questions. We all want to know the same things. Is there something that you want to talk about that no one's asking?
I mean, I think with Wandering Stars, um, there's there's a couple of like wild historical things that are real that
Mhm.
I feel like people just read through it and don't think about it. But like, there's two things that I think about. Um, so Jude Starr, that's the first character we meet in Wandering Stars. He is a prisoner of war at a prison castle,
Mhm.
and he becomes a bread maker. And this is the real Star became a bread maker and eventually a chief of police. These are
Oh,
real
wow.
things.
Wow.
Um, and there's a thing that happened where they brought somebody in, to like put casts on all of the native prisoners to measure the size of their heads.
Yeah.
um, because the thinking then was like, why are they inferior? It must be the size of their heads or their brains, or and they called what they were doing, they called them life masks. If you look up Fort Marion life masks, you can see pictures of it online.
Mhm.
They're still at the Harvard Museum, the Peabody Museum at Harvard. Um, so you have these native people putting on these life masks that basically make white casts of them.
Yeah.
And this is a time where the beginning of assimilation. So the boarding schools were institutions of assimilation, and you have this real thing that happened where you're being covered with a white cast
Mhm.
while you're trying to be assimilated. It's just like the crazy fact that I don't feel like one person has like noticed that this, I don't know if they're thinking it's just fiction and
Mm,
so therefore not as interesting.
mm.
But it really happened and these things still exist and you can see them. And then the other piece is the camel.
Oh yeah,
There's
the
a scene
camel.
at the sort of like the end of the first character, Jude Starr. He comes across this camel, and people don't think about camels in America, but we had all these camels shipped over from Saudi Arabia during the Civil War to traverse these desert-like spaces. Um, and at the end, when the Civil War ended, they just sort of set a bunch of them free. And so this was also like a real possibility that you could come across at this time period, you could come across a wild camel in an American desert or desert adjacent area. So those are just things that I'm like, I don't know. I don't know. If sometimes it feels like the my what I'm trying to do with the book is to like tell everybody about atrocity and historical trauma, and that's like the main thing I'm doing. And it's like that's something that just exists in history. And I happen to be writing about this part of history. I'm not intending to like put that mantle on the reader. Like
Mm,
this is like my tribe's history, and we are at the like beginning of the origin of boarding schools. Like Southern Cheyennes were literally the blueprint for boarding schools.
for the car.
And so sometimes I feel I feel like there's a certain way of reading it where it feels like the whole point is to tell you to feel bad
Mm,
about American history. And it's really, I would never want to put that on the reader. Like I think it's an interesting and important part of history to think about.
mhm, mhm. Well, and as an interviewer too, who happens to be a white woman, I'm very conscientious of the optics, right? And asking questions about, a history that I see is completely unacceptable. And I see a future that's going to have the same stuff because we're not demanding change. Um,
And we're not looking, I don't always love the history repeats itself if you don't look at it kind of thing.
mhm,
Because I don't think, well, not enough people do look at it, but um, I think it's it's just something that it feels so unrealistic to imagine that enough Americans are going to want to think about what this country is and what it came from for it to be meaningfully changed for the future. This is going to sound super pessimistic, but but I will say there has been taught in like so many high schools, and I have to hope, even though it might sound naive, that fix reading something like this could change people and the decisions they make
Yeah,
in whatever
yeah,
ways
yeah,
their life takes them
yeah.
for the better. So maybe I'm being pessimistic and maybe naively optimistic.
At the same time. Listen, when I think of There, I love that book because of the character development, because of these people who I come to know in this inner city life that I don't know. I grew up in the country actually. And that's why that book is so important. It's the character development, it's the writing, it's what's possible, right? And there's a certain hope in it too, in your writing, I think, that really comes through. We don't want to read something that's just going to depress us and tell us how awful our history is. It's so much more than that. And it's well done. So I'm glad you're working on your third book. And I want to ask you, um, is it going to be named after a song? Since
It's
you
not.
seem to like to do that.
It's not, and it's not related to the first two books at all.
Okay. Okay.
It's contemporary and it's in Oakland,
Hmm.
and there are fewer characters.
Mm.
I think there's just going to be three characters.
Oh my gosh. Does that feel harder a little bit or
No,
easier?
it feels like a relief.
Okay.
It feel
Okay.
like I have the whole thing structurally already mapped out,
Mm.
and the mapping when you have more people is much harder to get at. So I'm
Yeah.
hoping to finish this one a lot faster. It's going to be a shorter book, um, and I'm excited about it. I don't know how much I can say about it yet,
You
but
can't. I know you can't. So I won't ask you to.
but I'm trying to finish it this summer.
Mhm.
A draft anyway that
Oh, nice. Nice.
Jordan will give me helpful but hard to digest notes about, I'm sure. And I'm also working with a studio on an original screenplay that
Oh, wow. Okay.
is moving along as well. So that's exciting too. And also different, the totally different tone, and still, you know, Native people, um, and thinking about identity and stuff like that. But
Nice. Yeah. Because I think your books are universal too. I just want to say, it's about the immigrant experience, is universal. And there's so much in it that's so layered and so complex and yet easy to read. So I just want to put that out there that I'm so glad you became a writer and that I've
thank
had the
you.
pleasure of interviewing you here today. I do have one final question. We'll bring Julie back in to join us.
Yeah.
But what about your music? Are you still pursuing music at all?
So I don't get to play as much as I would like right now, but
You have a 2-year-old, so that makes sense.
yeah. But I played a lot during the pandemic. Um, and so I've sort of quietly done this, and I haven't, this is why this is making it less quiet, but I have posted songs that that are on Spotify and iTunes under the name Orville Redfeather, that are
Oh,
sort of like as if he recorded them along the way to give kind of
okay.
like a real dimension to his character. And they're
That's
just like
awesome.
they have like sketch in the title because they're just like ideas that would have came to him. Um
Kind of like
so
you describe in the book.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so you
Okay.
can check those out
Orville
on
Redfeather. Yeah.
iTunes, Spotify, or SoundCloud, and there's a few others on SoundCloud than there are on the others. Um so I am, but I always will. Music is very personal to me, and I probably won't be doing very much public music stuff. But I'll always be doing it for myself.
That's awesome. And since Julie's not here, I do have another question. Actually, I
Oh,
have a
wait a
million.
minute.
No, I want to know. I'm like worried about Blue. I want to know that she's okay.
So Blue and a slew of characters from there, I definitely wrote them in, and Jordan um, very kindly and gently guided me away from them. Let's just say.
Okay.
Um,
It's her
so
fault.
um and I no, I ultimately agreed with her that that's the whole thing, is like she wanted to focus on the family and have it be tight,
Hmm.
and I wanted that too in the end. So I don't, you know, there may be something in the future that includes certain characters that I've um
Short story.
yeah, I don't know what that looks like. There's definitely a ton, you know, I had to write like 3 or 4 books to get to the one book in both cases. So there's a lot of material that I haven't touched that um I imagine I would revisit if I'm like in a dry spell um
Yeah.
of some kind.
Yeah. Thank you, Tommy. I've really appreciated your time and
Thank
joining
you
us
so
today.
much for all of your generous questions that had really nice compliments embedded in them. I appreciate that.
It was a great conversation. And we have got some great questions from the audience. So we've still got a lot of people watching with us. So we'll get to as many of them as we can here. Um, okay, Tommy, here's one. Would you say your writing style is less conventional? Now, this one came in early, so you might have already touched a little bit on this. Would you say your writing style is less conventional in the second novel? If so, why? Is it a function of the context?
I think the second novel is more introspective and interior. Um, and I think there's sort of like a, when you tell the reader at the beginning of the book that there's 3D printed guns and a robbery and everyone's going to this powwow, it sets a narrative engine going that it's not always even in the writing, it's not always something that I'm doing, but it gives the reader this little engine that gets them moving through the book faster. sometimes, like I said, it's not even me doing it. It's a function of the structure and the way I designed the first book. So there's nothing like that in this book. You're like way back in history, and if you peeked ahead, maybe you know we're going to end up in the present, but you don't necessarily know or are given an expectation. So I think that's a big difference and part of the interiority piece. I think I tend to naturally write on a more interior plane than a plot driven one. Um, and I think I allowed myself to do that with this book because it didn't have a structure that required us to keep moving forward in a sort of a way that required a certain kind of pace. Um, Conventional or not, I don't know. Like I don't I try to write books that are readable, and is that conventional? I really don't know. Like I think there's a certain way of looking at what is conventional and what is not that has to do with false ideas about what narrative is. Like, there's certain people that hate the stream of consciousness style itself, and maybe would call that style unconventional. But I think we have enough books written in that style and sentences written in that style that you couldn't honestly call it unconventional. And I think I do a little more of that in this book, longer sentences and a little bit more like stream of consciousness style. Um, so some of that may have been based on the content or the context of the characters, but I think ultimately I was trying to not write the same book, and whatever that meant, there were new challenges and new styles that I'd never written in before. Um, so I don't know how if I answered the question.
The next one coming in is, do you think it's important to you did a little bit of the second part of this question, but I'm still going to throw it out. Do you think it's important to read There before reading Wandering Stars? And how would you compare the two books? You've already
I don't think that it's necessary. And working with my editor, there was very much like, let's make this standalone and not rewrite stuff and not make the reader need to know too much. And I liked that advice and I followed it. And so no, you don't need to have read There. I think it would enrich the text. There's another way of reading the book. And I like to imagine that one day there could be this version of There and Wandering Stars with a new title that I'll one day come up with, where it is the first part of Wandering Stars, There in the middle, and then the second and third parts of Wandering Stars afterward.
I did
Um,
that. I
oh, did
did
you?
that. I
Oh,
totally
man.
did that. I was reading Wandering Stars, and then when I got to, it's like a third of the way. And all of a sudden, I'm like, wait a minute, I know these names. This is so familiar. And then I was like, oh my God, because I didn't know. I hadn't paid enough attention to know that had the same character. So it was a total surprise. So yeah, then I went and read There and back to the
Did you like the experience of doing the?
Loved it. And I'm so glad I did it. And no, to answer his question, you do not have to read There to read Wandering Stars. It's absolutely standalone, but it does enrich the text 100%. And I was like, I don't know, I was kind of excited that I did it that way because I loved There so much too that I got to read it again. So that was cool.
Yeah, so I think it'd be super cool if one day it's one book. I just have to come up with the right title for it.
maybe there's a song out there.
I know yeah.
Beth Gibbons is I think she's about to go on tour, and my publicist got in touch with her people and sent her a copy. So maybe a future song of hers because she's still writing music.
There you go. So you always throw that stuff out there in the universe. All right, we got time for a couple more here. So just so and Halika's is asking, what inspired you to write a novel? And was this the only genre or format choice?
So the beginning of my writing, I was doing like pretty unconsciously. I was in sound engineering school, and I only like consciously remembered it much later. I was writing like prose poetry stuff while I was listening to lectures about sound. Um, and luckily there's no evidence of that. And then the years in sort of like trying to find my writing voice, there was a lot of short stories and um, a lot of experimental stuff that it was all short form. There was no big project. When I found out I was going to be a father into the end of 2010, that was the first time I was like, I want to take on a bigger project. I want to make if writing is this meaningful to me, why can't I take it more seriously and take on a more serious project? Not with it in mind that it's going to mean career, just like this is what I'm most passionate about. I need to take it more seriously because I'm like going to be raising a human and trying to teach a human how to be a human. And So I had been wanting to write a novel for a long time because I love the form. I love the novel as a form. Um, and it wasn't until that moment, like a month after I found out I was going to be a father, that I came up with the premise for There There. And it was just like a bunch of people are going to sort of crash into each other at a powwow at the Oakland Coliseum, and you're going to find out how they're all connected. That was just like the basic premise. Um, so it was the novel for a long time. It was what I wanted to do, but I hadn't taken it seriously enough, and I hadn't thought of an idea that I could really like take a lot of time writing into.
Yeah. Okay, Robin and Adrian, I'm so glad you asked this question because this is what I've been wanting to ask too. So I'm going to combine these two a little bit. So Robin would love to know the books and authors that you're reading now, or those that have deeply affected you. And Adrian commented that she sees a lot of books. So who do you love reading?
So I I love reading contemporary fiction. I have major holes in my classics department. Um, I haven't read that many of the classics because when I started reading, I completely did it on my own terms. I was working at a used bookstore and would just read whatever like I wanted to. Um, um, so I read a lot of work in translation, a lot of South American literature. Um, like when I first got into reading, Borges and Kafka were super important to me, and Clarice Lispector was like huge for like figuring out voice and what you could do. And I think I look to my favorite writers when I read their books, it makes me want to go write immediately. Um, and I feel like the books that I love the most give me permission to do something that I want to do in my own writing. Like the feeling is I'm being given permission to do something, not like I'm stealing the idea of something they come up with, but just like, oh, you can do that. Whoa. And then I'll do my version of that. Um, so, this question's always hard because I need to have like a list where I can read off. There was like a ton of influences for there, like books like Jennifer Egan, Colin McCann, Marlon James. There were books that and authors that like were I was directly trying to do something with the form that was based on actual books. Love Medicine by Louise Erdrich. Louise Erdrich is one of my favorite authors of all time. Um, I literally wrote Wandering Stars with Kaveh Akbar, and his book Martyr came out, and you all should go read that.
Such a good book.
So we're dear friends, and we trade pages still, and we actually next Friday we're going to trade pages for our next books again. So Toni Morrison was really huge for Wandering Stars. I hadn't read any Toni Morrison before there, and I read everything while I was writing Wandering Stars, and she's just one of the greatest fiction writers we've ever had. Um, but books this year, like I'm just finishing Knife by Salman Rushdie, which is amazing. Dave Eggers has a young adult book called The Eyes and the Impossible, which is amazing. I read Percival Everett's James
Oh,
while reading Twain's Adventures of Huck Finn for the first time. I hadn't read it,
Mm.
and I read them together, which was a super cool experience. Hanif Abdurraqib's new book, There's Always This Year, is beautiful. I'm also reading Demon Copperhead and David Copperfield at the same time in the same
Oh,
spirit.
that's cool.
Nam Lee just put out a poetry collection called 36 Ways of Writing a Vietnamese Poem. He's an Australian Vietnamese writer, but he has a short story collection called The Boat that came out in 2008, which is incredible. Like one of the best short story collections I've ever read. That is, and then Calling for a Blanket Dance was a really important book in conversation with Wandering Stars while I was writing Wandering Stars. That was an important book for me. I could keep going, but I think
oh,
that's maybe enough.
I want to meet with you like every 3
yeah,
months and
yeah.
just keep
You need
doing
to
this. Yeah.
exactly. You need to write one of those like just tell us what you're
Your
reading.
book list. Yeah.
Tell us your book list because it's
Do you
fantastic.
you should totally do that. I know you're on social.
I'm really not on social.
Oh, you're not. Okay. Well, it's yeah. I'll give you my email address. I'll be on social for you.
Maybe we could do that. You send it to Warwick's and go, this is what
There you go. Tommy Orange's book list.
Tommy
It's
Orange's
really
book list via Warwick's.
Yeah, there you go. That's awesome.
Tommy, this was an amazing conversation. Thank you for your generous time and sharing your wonderful books with us, and absolutely cannot wait. I was telling Tommy in the green room, I had the honor and privilege of meeting him even prior to their being published, and we all knew it was going to be something special when we read it years ago, and it is just continuing to be. And Wandering Stars is amazing, and cannot wait for your next one. So hopefully you'll be here, and maybe we'll have another conversation with Jennifer.
That would be awesome.
Thank you so much,
Tommy.
Jennifer. That was such a lovely conversation.
Great conversation. Thank you, Jennifer, for your time.
Have fun at the Daniel Lanois concert.
I will. Thank you.
All right. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.